Back to India now. New Delhi hosted an important visitor today, Sri Lanka's President Ranil Wickremesinghe. He met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also President Draupadi Murmu. This was Wickremesinghe's first trip to India after taking office as president. As always, two parts to it: the results and the politics. The results can be divided into three: connectivity, energy, finance. India and Sri Lanka have agreed to resume passenger ferry services. They will also increase the number of flights. One decision that stands out is a land bridge. Now, as you know, India and Sri Lanka are separated by water. The distance at one point is only 50 kilometers, 50. The idea is to link them. Both sides have agreed to conduct feasibility studies. So that's connectivity. Now to energy. An oil pipeline is being proposed between India and Sri Lanka. It is expected to cost around $4 billion. Now, pipelines are better than ships. They cost less and are more reliable for trading oil. India also agreed to pump more money into the Trincomalee tank farm. It's located in northern Sri Lanka. The plan is to turn it into a massive industrial and energy hub. Finally, economic cooperation. Sri Lanka had decided to use the rupee for bilateral trade. They will also use the UPI now. That's India's online payment system. So some important deals and decisions. But beyond that, what was the mood in New Delhi? A bit frosty, I would say. Wickremesinghe took charge in July last year. He had to wait 1 year, one whole year to visit India. Normally, Sri Lankan presidents do not take that long. Look at Wickremesinghe's predecessor, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He took charge as president in November 2019. Within days, India's foreign minister paid him a visit. By the end of the month, Gotabaya had also flown to New Delhi. So 1 year is a long wait, and it tells you a story. The story of how India-Sri Lanka relations have changed. There is a new elephant in the room, or rather, a dragon. Wickremesinghe says his country will be neutral between India and China. Neutrality may sound okay for China, but for India, it is a downgrade. Colombo has historically been their sphere of influence, India's sphere of influence. But in the last decade, the dynamic has changed. Around 20% of Sri Lanka's external debt is to China. What's worse, they're playing hardball. All other lenders are negotiating together with Colombo, but not China. They say, let's settle this bilaterally. These loans and investments give China a lot of clout. Consider what happened last year. A Chinese spy vessel docked at the Hambantota port. India objected to this voyage, but Sri Lanka was powerless to stop it. So security and strategy are two big worries for India. Prime Minister Modi emphasized on this. Listen to this.
हमारा मानना है कि भारत और श्रीलंका के सुरक्षा हित और विकास एक दूसरे से जुड़े रहे हैं और इसलिए यह आवश्यक है कि हम एक दूसरे की सुरक्षा और संवेदनाओं को ध्यान में रखते हुए साथ मिलकर काम करें.
And how did Wickremesinghe respond to this? He said nothing about security. The Sri Lankan president was more focused on other things like economic cooperation and connectivity.
I believe that my visit to India has provided an opportunity to review our bilateral relationship, leverage the strength of geographical and civilization links, reinforce trust and confidence for our future prosperity in the modern world.
Where does this relationship go from here? Well, until last year, Sri Lanka was moving into China's grasp. The Rajapaksa brothers saw to that. But the protests gave India an opportunity. New Delhi gave financial aid worth $4 billion. The optics were good. China, the dangerous lender, and India, the helpful neighbor. But 1 year on, China has not disappeared from the island. In fact, they're back with a vengeance. In the month of May this year, a Chinese company bagged an important deal. They're developing a port complex in Colombo. So Sri Lanka's business with China is far from over. They may not like it, but they need that money. What can India do to counter this? For starters, the $4 billion assistance is history. We can't keep talking about it. Sri Lanka needs more investments and loans to reset their economy. But is India willing to splurge? Some of the deals signed today do signal some willingness. India is looking to invest in core infrastructure, things like connectivity and energy. But don't expect instant results. This is likely to be a long game of influence because Sri Lanka cannot abandon China overnight. And given the right investments and support, it could eventually happen. Also, India has something China does not have: long-standing people-to-people ties, centuries of shared culture, even religious links. If New Delhi can leverage that, things may speed up. It's not just a neighborhood. India is making diplomatic moves in faraway Latin America too. There are new synergies emerging. A defense deal is making headlines. Argentina wants to buy choppers from India. They have signed a letter of intent. This letter is with India's Hindustan Aeronauticals Limited, or HAL. It is a state-owned manufacturer. And what kind of choppers does Argentina want from HAL? Light and medium utility choppers. They'll be used by the Argentinian armed forces, but that's not the only thing that they're interested in. If reports are to be believed, Argentina wants two more Indian weapons: the Tejas fighter jet and the BrahMos missile. Recently, the defense minister was in India. His name is Jorge Enrique Tayana. He visited HAL's facilities in India. Look at this picture. It shows the minister sitting inside the cockpit of the Tejas aircraft. He also went to BrahMos Aerospace, which is the company that makes the BrahMos missile. Again, this is a state-owned entity, but it's a joint venture between Russia and India. Will Argentina buy the Tejas and the BrahMos? Too early to say, but going by some claims, the two sides have held discussions, and this follows the larger trajectory of India's defense industry. There is an obvious and sustained focus on exports. Recently, deals have been signed with the Philippines and with Indonesia. There too, the deal was for the BrahMos missile. But with Argentina, India's goals are more strategic. New Delhi wants a foothold in Latin America, and defense deals are a good way to achieve that. But why Latin America? What interests does India have in the continent? In the month of February, India's External Affairs Minister gave some insights. S. Jaishankar was delivering a speech at the India-Latin America conference. And he said, and I'm quoting, "India's ambition to become a global power required a footprint in Latin America." He's right. In May this year, Jaishankar made a rare visit to the region. He visited 4 countries: Guyana, Panama, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic. This was the first time an Indian foreign minister visited these countries. There were no major outcomes, but this visit was the beginning of a dialogue, an attempt to win over some friends in the region. You see, India is positioning itself as a leader of the global south. It has raised the issues of the region. It has brought regional players to global forums like the G7 and the G20, for which India holds the presidency this year. And if India truly wants to champion the cause of the global south, it cannot leave out Latin America. The region's combined GDP is over $4 trillion. More than 660 million people live here. They represent about 8% of the world's population. So India cannot ignore this bloc, especially on global platforms like the United Nations, because this is where votes from Latin American states continue to determine outcomes. India is pursuing a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. This is going to require reform, and such reforms, when they are put to vote, support from Latin American countries could come in handy. So building influence is necessary, and defense engagements are a tried and tested way to do that. In fact, India has done defense deals in the region in the past as well. It sold the Chetak helicopter to Suriname, military vehicles and trucks to Honduras, also to Argentina, Uruguay and Belize. There is a booming trade relationship as well. Last year, India's trade with Latin America was worth $50 billion. Evidently, New Delhi is investing in this relationship, but there are challenges. There is the tyranny of distance for one. This region remains largely inaccessible to India. There are virtually no direct flights, and that's a huge barrier when it comes to building trade ties. Also, China, as always, is a factor. Beijing got there first, and its influence in the region is strong and growing. I'll give you an example. Bilateral trade between China and Latin America is worth $450 billion. This was in 2021, $450 billion, 9 times that of India. So New Delhi must step up, and defense deals with Argentina are a significant step in that direction. And now let's move from drilling a hole in the planet to, metaphorically, drilling a hole in one's brain, because that's what education in the US state of Florida is beginning to sound like. It's the home state of the two top Republican presidential candidates, former US President Donald Trump, who moved there a few years ago, and Ron DeSantis, who's also the governor of Florida. Now, DeSantis is on the war path against common sense, it seems. I say this because of the state's new school curriculum and how the history of slavery will be taught in the US now. In Florida, teachers will have to teach students about the supposed benefits of slavery. Yes, benefits of slavery and how it helped slaves. We're not making this up. Here's a report.
Florida governor and U.S. Republican Party presidential candidate Ron DeSantis had once said, "Florida is where woke goes to die." But it seems like common sense is also meeting the same fate. And not just common sense, educational honesty and your conscience as well. Here's why. What do you usually think about when someone mentions slavery in the US? Millions of people from Africa forcibly brought to American shores. People brought in chains to work on plantations owned by white colonizers. Millions of deaths, rapes, and crimes against humanity. How people were robbed of their humanity and how they became the property of colonists. That's what actually happened. But according to Florida's Board of Education, it's not enough to know that and understand the horrors of slavery. No, they think you should also know about slavery's not often discussed benefits. They want students to know about, and I quote, how slaves developed skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit. We're not making this up. That's a part of the state's new curriculum. It's part of the section describing the work slaves did. You know, the unpaid labor they were forced to do under the threat of beating, starvation, and death. Things like picking cotton in the scorching sun, or being forced to build a plantation owner's house, or sweep the colonists' floors while they made a fortune on the backs of slave labor. Yes, Florida wants its students to know how all of these atrocities were skill development programs for the slaves. They apparently want students to get the full picture. Let's think about this from the perspective of an Indian urban legend. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan allegedly chopped off the hands of the workers who built the iconic Taj Mahal. The myth goes that this was to stop them building anything as beautiful ever again. It's a legend that's used to highlight the horrors of unchecked power. Now imagine if someone narrating this story then went on to describe how the laborers also benefited from the act. That cutting off their hands led to them learning to write with their feet or with quills in their mouths. How it forced the laborers to develop a unique new skill that may have been used elsewhere. Does that not sound absurd and ridiculous and downright disrespectful to those who have suffered? Which begs the question, what is Florida trying to do? There's also more in the new curriculum which seems like the state trying to justify slavery. The curriculum says students need to learn about slavery in other parts of the world. It talks about slave markets in Muslim countries, slavery in the Americas before European colonization, and even slavery in Asia. The Asian portion specifically mentions a law code from 4,000 years ago and the Indian caste system. All of this will go into showing students that slavery wasn't just an American phenomenon. Which it wasn't. Slavery has existed throughout human history. It's a fact. But to indulge in the kind of whataboutery Florida wants to peddle is to deny the sheer scale of the transatlantic slave trade. It's an insult to the memories of the millions who lost their lives as slaves. So why is Florida doing this? The simple answer is politics. It seems Ron DeSantis wants to take a leaf out of North Korea's book. Brainwash children by teaching them a warped version of history. Remove their capacity for critical thinking by feeding them sanitized and incomplete information. With about 86% of Florida students subjected to this curriculum in public schools, DeSantis may just succeed in muddying the waters of history and the minds of children. Last year, he brought in a law called the Stop Woke Act. It seeks to ensure that no child feels guilt or anguish or psychological distress during lessons on topics like slavery in America. The new curriculum is just an extension of this war on common sense. Politicians should be forced to stay away from education. They will always have a motive when deciding what the public should be taught. So politicians should leave it to the professors, because subjects like slavery need nuance that forces us to confront the mistakes and horrors of our past while moving towards a brighter future. Because you know the old adage, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
So tough times for the world. There is inflation, layoffs and pay cuts. But not for King Charles of Britain. Forget pay cuts, he's all set to receive a massive pay hike. The British monarchy has a budget of $110 million. By 2025, it will increase to $160 million, which is a 45% pay hike. How are Rishi Sunak and his government justifying this? By simply lying about it. Let me explain. The monarchy's budget is called the sovereign grant. Until the year 2011, the parliament controlled it. The MPs would decide how much money the royals would get. But that system has been changed. The new one is linked to profits. The monarchy has assets worth around $28 billion. This includes a lot of land and palaces. They're spread all across the UK. Now, assets generate profits, we know that, and the royal family gets a chunk of it, around 25%. So assume that the crown assets made $100 in profit. Then $25 of this would go to the monarchy. That's how it works. But in the latest report, the UK Treasury announced a change. The royals would not get 25% of the profit. They would only get 12%. How noble, right? The wise old king sharing his wealth with the subjects. Except he's not. Charles's share of the pie may become smaller, but the pie itself is now much bigger. Let me show you the numbers and explain. The crown's profit this year will be around $570 million, but next year it will double. The forecast is $1.3 billion. What explains the surge? Some royal land has been leased off for wind farms, and the payments will come in next year. So do you see what the British government has done? On paper, they have cut the royal budget, but in practice, they have increased it by 45%. The math is quite simple. 12% of $1.3 billion is still bigger than 25% of $550 million. So it's simple manipulation of facts. Look at the statement from the UK Treasury, and I'm quoting, "Cutting the rate to 12% is expected to reduce the sovereign grant by £24 million. This money will instead be used to fund vital public services for the benefit of the nation." And we thought China was good at propaganda. Let's be clear here. King Charles is not taking a pay cut, he is getting a massive hike, and that too in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Inflation in the UK is around 8%. Compare that to other G7 economies. In the US, inflation is 3%. In the Eurozone, around 5.5%. Japan, 3.3%, and Canada, 2.8%. So the UK is much worse than its peers. Earlier this month, they announced new packages for the NHS. That's the National Health Service, NHS. It's a publicly funded healthcare system. The NHS has around 1.2 million people on their payroll, doctors, nurses, administrators. Guess what their pay hike was? 5%. Inflation is 8%, but the pay hike was 5%. And these are the same people who worked 24/7 during the pandemic. They worked while UK officials partied at Downing Street, and their price, a 5% hike. Meanwhile, the 74-year-old with a made-up job gets 45%. I know it's an unfair world, but this is pushing it. The British royals already enjoy multiple financial privileges. For instance, they pay no estate taxes. In the UK, when you inherit highly valuable assets, you have to pay a tax, around 40%. But guess how much King Charles paid? 0%. So there are two questions to ask here. One, why does the royal family need all this money? They say it's for official purposes, like flying off to inaugurate something or buying ridiculously expensive clothes. Also, it's a big family. There are 10 full-time working royals. They keep traveling and they keep making public appearances, and all of this costs money. Question number two, do other royal families have budgets like these? Well, they do, but not this big. Monaco, for instance, spends around $54 million. The Netherlands, $49 million. Norway, also 49 million, and Belgium 15 million. The less visible you are, the smaller your budget. Now, I know what the UK government will say. The monarchy is a symbol of national pride. They're doing very important work for which they are paid. Well, we completely disagree. Cutting ribbons is not exactly important work. Neither is giving away trophies at the Wimbledon. Someone else could do all of this, someone more deserving. These expenses occur because the royal family exists, because you invite them to do stuff. As for all the crown assets and land, let's not even get started. This vast estate was not built on merit or hard work. It was built on slavery and oppression. Rewarding them with a 45% pay hike is controversial at best, criminal in the times we live in. You've probably heard of the Irish goodbye. It's when you leave a social event without saying bye to anyone. One moment you're making small talk and the next you're hopping into a cab. It's fast and final. But today, let me tell you about the Dutch goodbye. It's not a real thing, but maybe it should be, because the Dutch really want people to say goodbye. I'm talking about the tourists who flock to the European country in large numbers. The Netherlands has become a victim of its own popularity thanks to over-tourism. Over-tourism. That word sounds like a good thing, but it isn't really. Let me tell you why. Over-tourism refers to a big increase in tourist numbers. Basically, increase at such a high volume that it becomes a bad thing. It negatively impacts a country, like its local residents and environment. A big example of this is Amsterdam, capital of the Netherlands. It attracts 20 million visitors every year. People are drawn to the city for its canals and museums, and honestly, its party city reputation. But this Venice of the North wants to change that. It wants to limit the number of visitors. So now Amsterdam has banned cruise ships from its city center. More than 100 of them moor in the capital every year. They have become a problem. They contribute to mass tourism and pollution. For perspective, one big cruise ship produces as much nitrogen oxide as 30,000 trucks in a day. So Amsterdam has been trying to clamp down on over-tourism for a while now. In the month of March, they launched an online campaign to stop young men from holding alcohol-fueled parties. The campaign was literally called Stay Away. They've also banned cannabis in the red light district. And now they want to increase the tourist tax. Amsterdam already has the highest in Europe. Last year, they earned some $155 million in tourist tax. But nothing is dissuading the visitors. This is the post-pandemic travel boom, or what they call revenge tourism. Greece expects 30 million visitors this year. Spain had 8.2 million tourists arriving in the month of May alone. Flight costs have increased in the last few years. Hotel prices have soared more than 50%. Tourist taxes have gone up. Yet people are undaunted. They want to travel to faraway lands. And what do they do when they get there? Usually click selfies. And no one hates it like Italy does. Its town of Portofino was visited by so many tourists that they blocked the traffic. Tourists were stuck in selfie-taking positions. So now the town has slapped a $300 fine against selfies. Even though tourism is a big draw for Italy, it makes up about 13% of their GDP. But they're also beginning to despair of it and imposing draconian measures like this one. Walking in flip-flops on certain roads will earn you a fine of over $2,700. Snacking in the center of Venice is not allowed. Sitting on the steps in Rome will lead to a $270 fine. One Italian beach even forbids you from making sand castles. The list seems endless. And over-tourism, by the way, is not just a European problem. Places like Bali, Bhutan, Peru and Thailand also suffer from it. They too have imposed measures, from increasing tourist taxes to imposing hiking bans like in Bali. It's obvious that tourism is a good thing for a country. It helps create jobs. But sometimes tourism expands so much it fails to acknowledge its limits. It turns destinations into the opposite of what they once were: overcrowded, overwhelmed and damaged. Bad for the locals and depressing for the visitors. You may see a lovely location on Instagram, but visit it only to wait in hour-long lines and have that sunset view obstructed by phone cameras. Eventually, all the effort to visit a foreign place sometimes brings only one reward: a money shot for Instagram. Think about it. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. But first, let me ask you a question. What happens when 500 large golden dogs meet in one place? It makes for the most adorable Vantage shot. Starting with the largest gathering of golden retrievers in history, where hundreds of golden-coated canines met in Scotland to celebrate the birth anniversary of the breed. A suspected underground gas explosion rocked South Africa's Johannesburg. It ripped open roads and overturned vehicles. The blast killed one and left dozens injured. After a period of calm, Peru's Ubinas volcano has resumed eruptions. And finally, what makes the 21st of July significant? We're taking you back to the year 1960, when Sirimavo Bandaranaike was elected the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. She broke the glass ceiling to become the world's first woman Prime Minister. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching.
A bomb or something exploded.